Shalom, I'm Rabbi Jonathan Ginsburg. This video is about the double Torah portion that concludes the end of Numbers that we read many years. They're called Matot-Masei. And they tell very important and interesting stories and values and law for the Jewish people. For one thing, they talk about the various places that the Israelites camped in their journey of 40 years in the desert. On one hand, you might ask, why does anyone care where they camped? But the sages noted that it's like a human being in examining the various places that we sojourned in our lifetime. First of all, the life cycle events, thinking back about our place of origin, about our birth, about our adolescence, our bar mitzvah, our bat mitzvah, our high school years, our college years, our majors, our career choice, our dating, our marriage, illness, children, the experiences that they had. We basically remember our life through the various stages of our life. Another way to examine it is through the places where we actually lived. I lived in this house, I lived in that house, I lived in this city, I lived in that city. So too it's important in remembering the history of our ancestors to recount the places that they journeyed. And it wasn't as if they stopped and camped every few weeks. They were in about 20 places in the 40 years. They were in some places for a very long time. Another story talks about is the boundaries of the land of Israel. Now, it's clear that God promised a lot of land, much more than exists in the current state of Israel, to the Jewish people, the Israelites. And so anyone who is trying to explain that the Jewish people are not entitled to a homeland have to account for the Bible and God saying that this is the land of Israel. Now, most Jews have been very understanding of the desire for peace and have continuously said that for the sake of peace, that Jews should settle for less land than the Bible promises them. Not all Jews agree to that, but most do. So much is the desire for peace. But the amount of land occupied by the Jewish people today is a very small slice of the peace that was promised to our ancestors in the Bible. Then there's another interesting story that goes to the heart of the issue of the Jewish people living outside of Israel. And there is a debate among some of the great rabbis in the Middle Ages as to whether it's incumbent upon all Jews to live in Israel or we have an option. In fact, some of the prominent Zionists, like Theodor Herzl, in the last century, in conceiving about the new Jewish state, believed that once the state came into being, every Jew would go there, and the ones who were left would eventually evaporate. Well, it certainly hasn't happened that way. This particular story is about 2.5 of the 12 tribes, Reuven, Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh, who come to Moses and say that they'd like to stay across the Jordan, outside the boundary of the land of Israel, and settle there. Now, Moses first views this as a catastrophe and as a rebellion, but finally God assures him that if those people send their young men to help support the survival of the young Jews in Israel, then they can live outside in the diaspora. And that kind of is the basis for the Jewish existence today outside the diaspora. Then we have the establishment of the cities of refuge. If somebody commits manslaughter, accidental death, and they have 6 cities, 3 on each side of the Jordan, where they're supposed to live in protection, but in a kind of a special city for those people. And finally, a very interesting story about women's rights and about seeking justice. There's a man named Zlofchad who died, who was a good man, and he had 5 daughters. These 5 daughters realized that the law says at that time that any land that belonged to their father would now not be inherited by the girls. And so they come to Moses, and imagine the chutzpah of these girls coming to Moses, the big cheese, the most important guy in the world, who's responsible for all of the Israelites, and they make their case to him that it's not fair. And Moses doesn't argue. Very interesting. He simply turns it over to God, and God says that the cause of the girls is just. So God realizes the law until then wasn't the way it should be, and the law changes itself right there. A fascinating story about the flexibility, about changing law based on ethics, about the Torah itself changing, about women's rights. That is the story of Matot-Masei, and there we end the book of Numbers.